What's up, everybody? It's time to talk prospects again, and I got a very special guest today. It is Matt Morris from Scout the Statline, also co-host of the Dynasty Dingers podcast. Matt and I go way back for what was it, two weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? It was, but
Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah, that's about right. So some of you may know did that TG FBI Potapalooza. We talked post hype players. Been talking about post hype players quite a bit this offseason and prospects. I figured let's get deeper into some prospect talk with a guy who knows his stuff. He knows his prospects. He knows his dynasty. If you haven't checked out that podcast, really good stuff. So first of all, Matt, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, it was really interesting doing our podcast Palooza and just really touching on redraft because as you said, I focus more on dynasty and really seeing the excitement of the value of those post hype guys. Because as I said to you that day, I've been following some of those guys for 5, 6 years, hoping that they become what maybe we were hoping they materialize into. And that's just the reality of prospects, right? Some make it, most don't. But you always kind of hold out a little bit of hope.
Sometimes way too much hope. That's the problem. Is
Yes.
we have to ground ourselves in reality a little bit, and that's actually why I want to bring you on. So I did also put out not too long ago top 25 prospects for redraft. I don't do a whole lot of dynasty content. I feel like most of the viewers are redraft. For fantasy baseball, I mean, let's just be honest, it's not quite as widespread as fantasy football these days. And then among fantasy baseball, dynasty is even more. It's a commitment, right? I mean, it's commitment just to know enough players to be able to draft a dynasty team and maintain it. I acknowledge that. And so, but there are people who want to know more about the prospects, the rookies, and we also want to make sure that they know who's actually going to help them this year that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, and also who to stay away from. I think that's almost more important, right? Who not to fall for the hype, who not to get too excited because that hype fades pretty quickly. So I want you to help me touch some grass, get back to reality here. We're going to talk about some of the biggest name prospects that could be viable that are getting drafted for the most part, but also maybe some players you should know about. So I figure let's just start with the guy who's pretty much number one on most, if not all, lists. Sometimes number two, like whatever, it doesn't matter. The list will change next week. Roman Anthony, the Red Sox, and then let's just throw Kristian Campbell in there. These guys are getting drafted sometimes. They're getting a lot of hype. What do you actually expect from them this year?
Roman Anthony is an interesting case because I heard it best from Arm Layton this past week of Just Baseball, where he talked about the ceiling actually carrying the floor with Anthony. His raw tools, his exit velocities, the home run he hit, just a couple nights ago that was prodigious. It really showcases that immense talent that he has. I'm okay if you're looking to draft Anthony as your fifth outfielder, maybe your first bench outfielder, or as your first bench outfielder with the expectation that he may step into that fourth or maybe even third outfield role in redraft. But you have to understand the huge risk is if he does not come up by May, he may not be up until July or August. And there's a lot less certainty with Anthony's projected timetable than there would be for Campbell. They seem to be really pushing Campbell. I'm thinking for an opening day spot potentially. We have news this past week of Devers potentially now playing DH, right? After the comments he made early in spring about being a third baseman. Campbell has struggled in spring, though. So Anthony, I do think returns value. I think he could probably be a 250 hitter. I think we're looking at 15 to 20 home runs if he's up in May. Over the course of the season, we're going to have great counting stats because the raw tools are just so incredible. Campbell, I'm a little uncertain about. I know the playing time will probably be there. The swing concerns me a lot. He just doesn't move like traditional baseball players. Alex Cora even commented on that and talked about how he's a comp to Jaylen Brown in the NBA. It was a very odd comment, but it made sense with the way his body moves. And it's concerning from a traditional scouting perspective, but he had such an incredible year last year. We've seen players that don't mechanically align with the rest of the league have success as well. I think of Hunter Pence, first off the top of my head. So I don't want to knock him for that. My concern is it's been a little bit of a rough spring, but they believe him in Boston. And if the organization believes in you, I'm going to believe in you as a prospect evaluator. So I think Campbell's the better take in redraft because second base is weaker. And where he's being taken, the upside has really been sucked away. So I think it really is about how you're organizing your team. And if you want to take a really big shot, maybe a little bit later, and hope that Campbell is your second baseman where you filled other holes, I say do it. For Anthony, I think it's either you've completely neglected outfield or you've stacked outfield where he can be a miss.
Yeah, and ultimately, with almost all of these guys, save for maybe the next one we'll talk about, I mean, that's it. It's always a calculated risk. You don't know if when they're going to be with the club, how much, how long of a leash they're going to get, if any. And this is where it goes back to the post side players we discussed, on the Potapalooza. A lot of people were very high on Jordan Walker the last 2 years, and we saw how that went, and on and on. Campbell is a guy who's really, it's fascinating his situation because just when you thought perfect opening for him, then they went out and get Alex Bregman, but not to play third base, and that whole situation is just weird. So I probably will take a wait and see approach there because I have no idea what's going on in Boston these days. Okay, but I have to start now with Jasson Dominguez. So I guess I officially planted my flag, saying, come on, I know there's no guarantee with anybody, but why not take the shot here? The five tools, right? The upside, the readiness. He's had a taste of the majors. It's just he was hurt. How irrationally high am I on Jasson Dominguez by saying he could be a borderline league winner?
I think you're correct. And we've seen Dominguez showcase the power, right? That's already a check. We've seen him showcase a little bit of the speed. I'm going with a check as well. The average at the pro level has been unproven yet, but also incredibly short sample size for a kid that's very, very young still. And I think the biggest piece for this, when we're talking about all of these prospects, is team context. When you have Aaron Judge in your lineup and Jazz Chisholm, like now that Jazz is there, that lineup is significantly better than it was in 2023 when they didn't have Soto and they didn't have Jazz, right? So I think Dominguez will improve with the counting stats just for that sake alone. And I think we're going to see linear development in 2025 from Dominguez, where we could get a 270 hitter with potentially 25, maybe even 30 home runs. If he can go out and steal 20 bags, we're talking about a very good potential for a league winner. If he can steal 30, or he can go 30-30 in a rookie season, which I'm not saying is likely, I do think it's possible. Now we're talking about incredibly blowing past his ADP. And I took him in TGFBI because from an upside perspective, there's nobody even close in his range.
All right, that's the confirmation bias I was looking for. And the thing is, with that potential upside, where you're still able to get him in most drafts, it's definitely outside the top 100 picks, sometimes lower than 120. I can't think of too many players with that same ceiling that you can get later than that. So, I mean, that's what it all comes down to: is why not take a shot on that upside? Of course, it might not happen, but you could say that for almost any of those players in that same realm.
I'm trying to just think back on my most recent draft. I want to say I took him before I took Yelich or decided on Trout. And great players, right? But we know the knack, which is will they play 80 games? And we don't have that same concern with Dominguez. So there are definitely other players that I think will provide you league winning value, but the likelihood is so much less because we've seen it now 3-4 years in a row where you just can't rely on those guys.
Yeah, and the lineup will be interesting because there was some talk earlier in the spring. Maybe Dominguez hits leadoff. Then now I saw last week, well, maybe Austin Wells is hitting leadoff. Like, I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen, but Boone is the one who put it out there. So we'll see. But I don't think that's even necessary. If he's hitting sixth or seventh in that Yankees lineup,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still pretty in on him. Like, I think it's okay. So yeah, definitely somebody I'm still going to be all in on until he proves me wrong. So don't prove me wrong, Jason. I've also been very high on Matt Shaw, and I don't know if we've gotten anything official yet. No, he missed a little bit of time with injury, but are we seeing him win maybe the third base job, staying in the everyday lineup?
Yeah, the last news I saw was that he is traveling to Japan for the series, which was great news. But they're allowed 31 players for this trip. They have like a partial taxi squad, which is great for Major League Baseball if any of the players should have food sickness or have altitude issues on the plane ride. But that doesn't give us a guarantee that he will ultimately be the April third baseman, right?
Right.
And I want to say it was oblique or lat. So it was small tissue muscle issue, which is concerning. We are always a little bit mindful of that in spring training because they can linger. But I just can't see Justin Turner being the guy for very long if Shaw isn't given that starting role. Shaw has that 2020 upside. He has shown great consistent contact in the minor leagues. He had great power coming out of Maryland when he was drafted. There's just so much to like with the profile. And I still am okay with where he's being taken. Very similar to the Jasson Dominguez idea, his upside and where he's being taken with the other players in that little small pool. There's just not many players that I have certainty about. And with Shaw, he's one of the prospects that I feel most confident about because of age, because of ability over, level to level growth. I do think Shaw by middle of April at the latest is their starting third baseman.
I'm with you on that. One thing, a little bonus I like for fantasy purposes, if you're thinking of roster construction, in a lot of formats, he qualifies at third and short, sometimes even second as well. So you have that flexibility of where you might want to put him. Um, and I'll say for those who are drafting maybe right before, the official opening day for everybody, but after the Japan series, if he doesn't play, or maybe we do see Turner out there, facing his former team or whatever, just not giving Shaw. Maybe Shaw's not ready, whatever it is. Maybe that depresses his ADP even more. You can get
Mm-hmm.
him so late, and I still think again, one problem I really still think exists, that short sightedness. We're thinking the here and now. It is a long season. What happens in April does not define, and you can grab a guy that even if he doesn't do anything in the first couple of weeks is still worth having, and then you don't have to fight for him on the waiver wire. I'll stash him, and so I'll intentionally do that with some of these prospects, maybe some that we can talk about now. Um, Even if they don't make the opening day roster, put him in your NA spot, and that's why I really think all fantasy redraft leagues should have at least one NA spot. But that's topic for a different time. How just generally before we get to more specific players, how do you feel about that? Grabbing a guy who you feel might pay off, not knowing if when they'll get the call, but taking him on draft day, or maybe picking him up right after the draft, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, let's say Roman Anthony, they don't expect him to be up until May or June. Are you stashing him, or is it not worth it to you?
Yes, no, absolutely. And you said it earlier, it's roster construction. If I'm taking Acuna and I'm taking George Kirby and I'm taking Francisco Alvarez, right? Because the ADPs are falling and the value's there, I'm probably not taking a prospect to stash. Like, because I do in times like to take the value on the board. And if I look at my team and I have a great bench, but I have holes at starting positions, I'm less inclined to be able to have that flexibility with prospects. But I don't think most teams are going to draft 4 top 100 players because they just fall. So if you have one of the injured guys, you have at least one other spot for a prospect. I think it's advantageous to take two because the return you could get from, Roman Anthony, Kristian Campbell, even Matt Shaw, say he doesn't make the official opening day roster in April, he's going to provide you immense upside, as you said, at least in the second half of the season. So taking two of those guys, knowing that you've almost lost roster spots if you don't have an NA is important. As long as you go into that stash mentality with that idea that you're not dropping them and that you have at least one or two other guys on the bench that you're okay moving on from should you have injuries, I think it's a great strategy.
It's always about that balance, right? Got to strike the balance between, floor, ceiling, upside, and risk. So yeah, I hate to say it, always it depends. It's always the answer. Okay, so those are the prospects that I would say most fantasy baseball drafters will know about. At least you'll see show up on the rankings and all that. these are some names that look, again, if you follow baseball, even if you don't go deep into, the minors and prospects and rankings, then you might have heard of them, but you're not really fully aware. And you definitely should be aware of some of these guys. And let's start with Drake Baldwin, who probably would not have been drafted anywhere if not for the Sean Murphy injury. Sean Murphy is going to miss the start of the season. And this actually is a great opportunity because Murphy was pretty bad, pretty brutal last year, anyways. And Drake Baldwin seems to be a star in the making. I talked about him toward the end of last season, hoping he might get a cup of coffee. But this is this a breakout in waiting now that he's getting his shot?
Yeah, I think so. When I evaluate prospects, the really big statistic I like to look at is EVs. That's kind of in the metric community an old thought. 2 years ago, that was what everybody was on. But for me, what it shows is the ability to translate into major league hits. We see it from Judge, we see it from Ellie, we see it from O'Neill, right? The names go on. If you hit the ball hard, usually you have a better chance at having a good outcome. And Baldwin's EVs in AAA last year were, in my opinion, elite. 92.8 average, 111.9 max, had a solid launch angle at 7.7. Would like to see that creep up just a little bit to have more power potential, but 53.1% hard hit. And I kind of referenced some of the big names. Soto last year had a 56.8. That's only a difference of about 4. Aaron Judge was at 60.9, right? About 8 difference. And Ohtani at a 59.5. So he's an elite pairing for his metrics. The question was playing time. Sean Murphy signed to a long-term deal, right? That's always a big problem. Well, we finally have some clarity there. I think Baldwin is not being taken high enough. I think there's a really good chance that he comes out in April, part of May before Murphy's back, and wins this job, at least to the point where it's a split playing time. And then they're going to have issues, right? Is Ozuna then playing in right field so that Murphy can DH? Because they have to find a way to return value on that contract. And if Baldwin forces their hand, I think it will be really interesting to see what Atlanta does. But I do. I think Baldwin could be, at least for the first month, a top 10 catcher.
I put out there he should be drafted at least as a top 15 catcher. And I get you want to draft somebody a little bit more, known, safe ahead of him. But I think even in single catcher leagues, why not take a chance on a guy? I mean, because realistically, are there that many catchers with the offensive upside that he has? And even the ones you think you might say yes, they don't, because I know there's several, like Sean Murphy being one of them last year, that were massively disappointing. I mean, why not? The guy's going to get a job. He's going to have a clear path to at bats in an excellent lineup. And I'm not worried about other thing is like, was it Chadwick Trump? Couldn't
Yeah.
take no, and because the other thing I like is that Murphy's out, but Travis d'Arnaud, who hasn't been exciting for fantasy for a while, but a pretty good real life catcher, he's gone, and that would have been an easy solution for the Braves, just let d'Arnaud have the job. But now I see Baldwin getting a major opportunity, and again, it's like the same thinking, that I talked about with a guy like Dominguez versus a veteran, who's just far less exciting. Give me the upside. You know what I mean? The safe and the boring is not going to win you. It's not going to help you win your league. I don't feel like, I think the days of Alejandro Kirk
Yeah.
or let's see, Akiba Ruiz. I don't think those guys are going to, blaze a trail to help me win my league. So Drake Baldwin could help.
Well, I think this could work out really well for those that are bold. Augustin Ramirez in Miami, traded from the Yankees last year in the Jasson deal. There's uncertainty as if he's going to open the season with Miami. It's seeming like no. So you could potentially go from Baldwin, Murphy comes back, Baldwin loses playing time, maybe is even sent back to AAA. Who knows? And then immediately swap him out for Augustin Ramirez, who has some speed for a catcher and prodigious power. If all things play out correctly and you're able to construct your roster that way, you most definitely have an incredible upside play through the entire 2025 season. And you could have a plus catcher with the two players put together.
Nobody necessarily loves to play the streaming catcher game, but
Yep.
it's a viable strategy because again, if you do wait, you don't get one of those top tier catchers, you might wind up having to go to the waiver wire at some point anyways. So shoot for that upside. All right, now a guy we definitely have to pay attention to. He's forcing the Astros to pay attention is Cam Smith. And even with Bregman gone, it didn't seem like there was a path for him to contribute right away, but he's forcing his way possibly now to right field because the Astros do have some questions as far as their outfield, if not their base. So how much of this are you buying? Because again, still spring trading, right?
Yeah, it's still spring training, and what Cam did last year in the Cubs organization was lower minors, like the huge breakout that was circulating on social media. But he is a still young college bat for where he was taken to Florida State. He was developing pretty expedited, in an expedited nature at Florida State's last season. So I think we're still seeing this nature of a player that may only be 60%, maybe 70% of what we could expect, even at his peak projectability, and that's awesome for Houston. But we don't have enough data for me to really say, hey, this is absolutely real. We only have this very short sample size, and the big number that I wanted to lean on was excuse me, was his ability to pull the ball. In Houston, we want them to lean into the Crawford boxes. And this spring, he's sitting at a 35.3% pull. 2024 in the minors with 31.9. He has a very traditional spray rate. And also, one of the big problems in Houston is you do not want to hit the ball to center field. Even though the hill is gone and has been gone for a while, it still is a very deep part of the park. So if Cam can start to lean into that pull rate a little bit better, I'll have a lot of confidence. I think in non-redraft, he's a great play. In redraft, it's hard because this could be a roster spot where you have wasted, you drop him, and then all of a sudden, June, July, he takes off. I am buying Cam Smith. It's just you have to be really, really careful and really patient because, again, the kid is still developing and he's only shown real success at the lower minors and in spring training.
Might need a little bit more time. I mean, again, if the club shows confidence in him and he makes, the opening day roster, that's good, but that doesn't always lead to regular at bats. So I think, again, you always have to be careful with that, not to get carried away. But just to mention also, this is why I've been, you talk about the Crawford boxes, why I'm big on Isaac Paredes now being there in Houston, because as a very much pull hitter, Minute Maid last year, and I looked over the 3-year rolling period. This was they were 15th in park factor for home run factor for right-handed hitters, but last year was 8th, but still definitely above average. So it's a good spot. But again, if somebody is definitely a more of a pull hitter, which Paredes is, then that's great. And Smith, more of an all fields approach, like you mentioned, might not be quite as beneficial early, but there's still so much power that he's got time to tap into. So definitely want to keep an eye on.
Well, and the only thing I just wanted to add was Jackson Merrill, what he did for San Diego last year defied all of my expectations. An infielder traditionally moved to the outfield, very different player profile than Cam Smith, but Merrill hadn't shown a great track record in the minors either. Merrill's best season as a professional was his rookie season in the major leagues. And that's almost never the case for these prospects. I have this odd feeling that Cam Smith, because of the ballpark and the metrics and the environment, could have a very strong start. And out of all of these guys, Cam Smith is, in my opinion, most resembling the Jackson Merrill kind of profile coming into last year. Doesn't mean he's going to be Jackson Merrill. It's just a guy that I think could really surprise us and just defy really what it means to be a guy that doesn't show that linear progression over the course of 3 or 4 years.
Well, this is true, right? It's not always going to go the way we expect it. And there will be guys that we don't even have on the radar necessarily, or at least most people don't, that come out of nowhere. Like, what if it's Tirso Ornelas in San Diego this year, who's apparently on fire? You never know. Okay, now this pains me a little bit as a Hurricanes fan and a Miami native. We just talked about a Seminole. Now we have to talk about a Gator. But we do need to talk about Jac Caglianone, who is on fire this spring. And last I checked, he was hitting, is it 500? Yes, 500 with 3 home runs. But you could say the track record is pretty small in the minors as well. So do the Royals give him a shot? Is this just going to take more time?
Yeah, Jack is he's not a 2025 redraft guy for me. It's great what he's doing in spring, but I always like to remind people there was a player named Alex Ochoa, like it was 2001 for the Milwaukee Brewers, who hit like 400 with 9 home runs in spring training. And I thought we had this young budding 28-year-old superstar that I guess nobody in the league had heard of, right? Because how could he be a Brewer? Spring training is spring training. And what Kegs is doing is it's great. We love to see it as prospect evaluators because it's really showing those tools that we're dreaming on. But from a professional level, the Royals are not in a position to be letting a guy come up and potentially pulling a Jackson Holiday. The power's real, but the contact numbers outside of the zone and the chase, he has a lot of answers to really refine his game and take that next step to being a professional. And I don't think 2025 does him any service by promoting him too early.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. And again, I don't think too many people will overreact to spring training because nobody expects him to be ready this year necessarily. But when you see that, you look at the numbers, the again very small sample spring training numbers, but you're like, wow, and like, well, everybody knows this guy, like his name, right? Unless you know nothing about college baseball or whatever. But he's a pretty known commodity, and so that's why it might be easy to get carried away. But yeah, we always have to look at the reality of what we're getting.
Well, and we just have look over the last 2 years, right? And that's the biggest like snapshot I'll take for people. Jordan Walker, the first 2 weeks in 2023 spring training, it seemed as though we had the next Barry Bonds on our hands. And then once more of the major leaguers started going out and getting their reps, well, we started seeing some real concerns. Wyatt Langford last year, right? No matter how much you think of Wyatt Langford today, Wyatt Langford destroyed spring training last year and then proceeded to struggle for 5 months. And sure, maybe it was injury related, but it doesn't necessarily translate into, okay, these guys are absolutely ready for the major league roster. And I think that can confuse some of us and really inflate ADP because excitement is real and that's fine, but it also can come at a cost.
And that is especially the case. This is what I've been waiting for with pitchers. Okay. Um, Now, pitching prospects, which I've been told there is no such thing as, but um, look, there are some names we're going to get excited about, of course. And look, maybe they are stars in waiting. And the question is, how long do we have to wait? But let's just kind of lump together probably the two biggest names here. And I've talked about them on this channel a couple of times because we can't just ignore all pitching prospects. But Jackson Jobe, who apparently looks great as well this spring, although oddly, he's not getting a ton of whiffs despite his ridiculous arsenal. And then Bubba Chandler, who, of course, will be expected by some to be the next Jared Jones, at least, if not Paul Skeens, because now all of a sudden that's all Pittsburgh does, right? Just crank out great rookie pitchers. So, thoughts on both Chandler and Jobe and just prospects in general for pitching, because you accumulate some interesting numbers here.
Yeah, the concern for me for Job and Chandler is just the fact that they're former prep arms, right? They were drafted out of high school. So I went back 4 years and I kind of looked at Pipeline's top 100 to just really gauge who was the last really successful prep arm that was taken in his rookie season that would return value in redraft formats. And I expected to come up with 3 or 4 names that, I either forgot were drafted out of high school or had just slipped under the radar. And it was not necessarily the case. So I'll go year by year. 2024 preseason Pipeline Top 100 had Kyle Harrison coming in at 23 and AJ Smith Shawver at 69. Neither provided a full course of the season, or I would say even a month of true return value in redraft. 2023 preseason Pipeline had Grayson Rodriguez, who is our number one on this list for returning value, but not in his rookie season, right? If we remember, he was sent back down in his rookie season, only to come back up, I want to say August, September, and actually did give us a little bit of value there. He was 7th. We had Yuri Perez at 13, Taj Bradley at 20, Quinn Priester at 60. Quinn Priester is a bullpen arm now in Boston, if I'm correct. 2022, we had Shane Baz at 12. Baz looked really good for the 6 or 7 starts. Ultimately succumbed to injury and hasn't given us a full season yet. Let Matt Libator at 43. Again, another bullpen arm now. Mackenzie Gorin, 2021, was preseason at 6. Ian Anderson at 18. Matt Manning at 25. Then in 2020, we had Forrest Whitley at 19 and Michael Kopech at 20. So out of this list, Kopech, Whitley, Gore, Baz, and Grayson, I'll even put Kyle Harrison in that list, all pretty prodigious rookies and having a lot of excitement coming into their rookie season and redraft. And none of them really gave us that full season or even that half season that we need to continue to roster them, even if they're on the bench, kind of as you talked about earlier. So when I look at Jackson Jobe as probably one of the best, maybe next to Grayson and potentially Mackenzie Gore, I still have to have my concerns. And I'm just not taking him because I haven't seen a track record from other players to assume that he's going to be the outlier here. And then for Bubba Chandler, I love his stuff. I think he's going to be an incredible number 2 next to Paul Skeens long term. But I really think Thomas Harrington might be the guy to get the call first. Has better command, has a longer track record of showing volume in the minor leagues, is a control pitcher. So he fits this rotation in the way that they're going to throw a change of pace at different teams as they go through the rotation. And if Harrington does get the call first, it's going to continue to push Chandler's promotion back. And lastly, with Chandler, like they're going to be careful with him. He is a very, very good prize prospect. And I don't know that we get more than 40 innings from Chandler. And I would say if we're lucky from Jobe, maybe 120, 140. But you talked about Jobe having an inability to convert those strikeouts. I think at the major league level, because he hasn't had that experience yet, that's going to ultimately lead to a higher ERA. He is a dominant pitcher when it comes to his minor league numbers, but the upper minors, he hasn't been able to convert those counts into strikeouts. It's something he has to learn with his repertoire. And doing that at the major league level is going to lead to a higher ERA.
Yeah, and I wonder. I mean, it probably is something as simple. It's not stuff, right? That's why we get so excited about these guys. They have the stuff.
Yep.
That's why they're ranked highly. But you have to be able to command it. And with Jobe, it's not. I don't think that's been an issue. He's not, giving out all these free passes in spring. But to then take it to that level to be a dominant pitcher, or at least get strikeouts, it's that experience, knowing how to set up hitters, knowing which pitch to throw in which situation, which pitch to throw to which batter, and so on. Just knowing how to order that pitch mix, because having more pitches is great, but it's also knowing when to use them and how. And so with Jobe, again, it's probably just going to take a little bit of time. I still think he can be good this season. He can be effective, but we have to reel in those expectations, like always. But Jobe at least has the path right now. He's got a shot to actually be a starter for Detroit. And with Chandler, that's where it gets iffy.
Yes, I'm fully in agreement with that. And I think when we look at the projectable upside for Jobe, I think best case scenario is potentially Garrett Cole's rookie season. Again, Cole was a non-prep arm, even though he went to Orange Lutheran in Orange County and was one of the best player my friends have ever seen play. He went to UCLA, was drafted by Pittsburgh, came up very quickly. But Garrett Cole's rookie season was 19 games started, 117 in the third innings. He had a 3.22 ERA. Like that's absolute best case scenario. And now Jobe is destroying all of the returns and giving ADP gifts. But the likelihood of that is less for me because of what you said. Garrett Cole, because he went to UCLA, faced higher competition, had the ability to develop that repertoire, learned how to strike guys out. When you look at Jobe, the first year and a half in the minor leagues, he was just dominating with 2 pitches because he was so much better than his competition. As he got into double A, that changed. He hadn't developed his third and fourth pitch to the point where he knew how to use it within his pitch mix. So he just needs that time. I would really like to see this season Detroit allow him to continue to develop. I don't want a guy developing in that nature on my fantasy team for redraft.
Yeah, exactly. Like a dynasty, sure, you can get all the prospects you want, just need some to pan out, not all,
Yep.
but you can, yeah. I mean, I doubt you have it unlimited NA spots in your redraft league. Maybe one you can use for a pitching prospect, but even then, and the reality is, at the end of the day, for just production, from a production standpoint, the rookie pitchers that deliver aren't necessarily the guys who have that stuff, that prospect, hype. it's going to be guys who know how to command. Like you mentioned Harrington, it might be like a Michael McGreevy in St. Louis, or like a Noah Cameron, someone who, like, who's that? If you're not into prospects, you might not even have any awareness of these guys. But that's it. The guys who are a little less exciting get more done at the end of the day.
Yeah, it will be interesting with Jobe. I like the fact that he's with Scooball, and I'm even going to put Myers in there because Myers has always been a favorite of mine, right? Coming out of Auburn with the 1-1 pick. And he's going to develop with some really good pitchers. So I could see Joe being a second half guy that returns great value. But when we talked about who are you using in that NA spot, I would choose Roman Anthony, Kristian Campbell over Jobe, just for the simple fact that we can find Jackson Jobe's production elsewhere. It's harder to find some of that position player production elsewhere. So it's just picking your poison at that point.
Right. All right. Well, actually, I'll give you a chance to pick your poison in a second, but let me talk about. We're going to talk about. I guess we could call it a little more under the radar. Again, I'm thinking redraft guys who really typically aren't drafted or considered. We talked at the very beginning about Kristian Campbell. I see Christian Moore, who I did notice on Scout the Statline. He's got a little video on him on the very front page. He's a guy I feel like can deliver immediately because he's got an easy path to a starting job there, especially with Luis Rengifo still having hamstring issues. And let's face it, it's the Angels. Why not? Give him a shot. He's had that college experience, but do you feel like he's somebody who's on your radar, or should be on fantasy radars? Like if you really wait for second base, which I think is a good position to wait on this year, but is that too risky?
Yeah, no, we talked about this before we hit record today, right? Like it's a position that is actually very deep. It's just also very top heavy. And I think Christian Moore is a fantastic option if you are out of options. And I think when you look at his underlying numbers, he's a great reference point in comp to Brennan Lowe in Tampa Bay because the contact is right on par. The defense is kind of just okay. The power is pretty prodigious for both. More obviously a righty, and Lowe a lefty, but Lowe is going so much higher and also kind of slept on for what he can give you, especially in Roto, right? When you're talking about that home run production, Moore's speed isn't really there anymore. His sophomore season at Tennessee, I want to say he stole over 15 bags. Last season, I want to say it was more 6 or 7. But you're really going to lean into that power with Moore. The contact, though, again, 57.6% overall contact this spring, 67.7 in a small sample last season. So you could see a guy that struggles out of the gate, but we've also seen the Angels allow these guys to struggle at the major league level. Nolan Shanuel had incredible contact numbers over the course of his entire professional career. It hasn't necessarily translated to on the field success at the level that we need for fantasy. So I think the Angels will give Moore a chance. I personally will be keeping an eye out for either the team that drops him or when the fab run is that I have to go out and get him. The second baseman for the Rockies, Estrada. If you take him, yes, if you take him and say he's terrible for the first 2 weeks, maybe it isn't a bad idea to have drafted Moore as that replacement. So I think Moore is the perfect opportunity if you draft late as your second on the bench second baseman.
Yeah, counting him to be your starting second baseman is definitely a little risky there. I like that comp though, the Brandon Lowe, or I don't know, Lau Lowe. I can never. There's one of
I
them. It's
can't get it
Lau.
right
There's Brandon,
either.
Nate, Josh.
Yeah.
There's another Lowe. Which one is it?
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's a good comp because that's a guy I'm also waiting for. Now, of course, we've seen him almost have a 40 home run, 100 RBI season, so it's a little different. But if you can get something along those lines with the power that late, that's not the worst thing because there are a lot of fallback options at second base. Okay, so now who are your under the radar prospects that you feel like actually might be worth a late pick or just keep an eye on real close early in the season? Who are your favorites that you feel are ready for prime time?
We have two that I think have a chance of providing early season return. Chase Petty is having an incredible spring. And I know I kind of poo-pooed spring in overall numbers and what people are doing, but the Reds rotation is not in great shape. And I think Petty could be the first opportunity to slide into that rotation. There is some rumblings that he may open the season as the 5. I don't necessarily see it, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Fastball's up to 98. I mean, the velocity from his prep pedigree is back. And that's something that we've been waiting for in the prospect world for years now, to really see him come out and be the fireballer he was drafted to be. Location is good. Again, when you're talking about pairing him with, like-minded thinkers and players, no better than Hunter Green in that rotation to help develop him. So I think Chase Petty is a really sneaky guy. I would not be drafting him. I would definitely just keep your eyes out to see what's going on in the news with the Reds, where he falls. But I do think he is up in April or very early May. And we're talking about big time strikeout numbers here. So depending on how you organize your team, this could be a benefit and a boost if you went more with a conservative approach. And then the second name that I still think provides return early this season is Coby Mayo. The industry is souring. It's having a terrible spring, had a terrible debut last year. Once he really starts to see major league pitching, starts to understand the game, I think we could have a Mark Vientos explosion here, where we see a guy go from a 180 hitter with a 35% K rate to a 250, 260 hitter with a home run every 15 to 20 at bats. And it's just a matter of, what's your risk adverse ability there? Are you willing to roster Mayo as your prospect over Anthony? And how does that fall with your roster organization?
Yeah, last year was an experience with Orioles prospects, and every other week recommending, oh, stash this guy, he's next, stash this guy, he's next. And some got the call and some didn't. And then some we wish didn't get the call after they did. So it won't be that dramatic. At least we've seen some of that kind of settle down. Mayo's still kind of the one guy on the outside looking in. But like you said, at some point it's going to happen, right? He will get his shot. And when he does, he seems like he's pretty ready. So I agree with that. I'll definitely keep an eye on him. I was actually high. I know you mentioned on here, you talk about Colson Montgomery. I thought he might get a chance to break camp, and he's not ready yet. There were some plate discipline issues last year. The power jumped up, the strikeout rate jumped up too, and I guess they feel he's not quite ready. But again, this is the White Sox. He's going to get a shot at some point. But with the fact that also like a Moore with the Angels, Montgomery, anybody with the White Sox, do you get a little less excited for those players that are on those just horrific teams as opposed to a guy who maybe the playing time isn't as guaranteed, but it's just on an actual good team like the Orioles and Mayo?
No, it's actually the opposite. And it's because of what you said earlier, right? When you look at Jackson Holiday, Jordan Westberg, Coby Mayo, I'll put Samuel Basallo in there. The Orioles are competing to be division champions. They're competing for a chance to go to the World Series. They don't have the opportunity to just let a guy go out there and struggle, especially a group of them. And that's a big concern when you're doing redraft. You want to know the guy you're taking has playing time, even if he's terrible and you still believe in him. You'd rather him be at the major league level on your bench, waiting for that breakout to happen, as opposed to, well, he's back in AAA. When is he going to get called back up? Are we going to have an injury? So for the Colson Montgomerys, for the Christian Moores, I love that they're on bad teams, because if they do tap into their prospect shine, I don't need them to be on the Yankees or the Dodgers to return value. Because of where I drafted them, they should just by nature, even though the counting stats will be lower, give me that value. And I think a name that I had on the list was Luke Keeschel for the Minnesota Twins. I like him for 2025 a lot. I wouldn't be drafting him. He's a name that I would definitely put on my scout team. I'd look for him when he gets promoted, see how he does. But problem is he's in Minnesota. Like they're in the same bag as the Orioles. They're trying to win the AL Central. They signed Ty France to be a first baseman. Keeschel may have the opportunity to take that job now that they're moving him off second, but what if he struggles for a week? It's much easier to hand the reins back to France than it is to stick with Keeschel. So I'm definitely more inclined to draft the guys that are on bad teams, which doesn't make a lot of sense for fantasy, but in the prospect rookie realm, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, depending on your format, it might matter, but at the end of the day, you need those counting stats. You need to accumulate, and you can't do that if you don't get at bats. That's the first thing. That's the key. All right, let's do a couple of more players I do want to talk about. Let's do a little quick fire here. What you think about these players? Let's start with Jacob Misiorowski, a guy that I actually just kind of did a drafted stash in a very unique league that I do with some of my former colleagues. It's a bullpen only league. You can only draft relief pitchers. And so I'm kind of surprised nobody took Misiorowski, and he still can be put in my minor league spot for now. Do you think he's going to be up with the team soon? And you being a Brewers fan, what are your thoughts on Misiorowski?
I think he's absolutely a bullpen arm. And I think if Milwaukee's competing this year, like they did last year, kind of defying all the odds, I think he immediately facilitates that rookie season Josh Hader role, where we would see Josh Hader come in sometimes in the fourth and fifth inning if the game required it, where Milwaukee was making a comeback, starter was terrible. He's the fireman, right? Josh Hader would come in 6 and 7, lock it down so that we could get to the back end of the bullpen. Misiorowski has incredible stuff and also at times no idea where the ball is going. So I don't think he's ready to be our closer in Milwaukee. But when you're talking about a guy that just send him in there for an inning or 2 innings, have him overpower guys, like we talked about this, like especially after Aaron Savali comes out of the game, right? What kind of a changeup to throw the opposite team, the opposition, than to have Misiorowski at 98 with incredible two-seam sink come into the game. So I think he's going to be a great ratio play for you, and I think he's going to give you strikeouts. The concern is those ratios may be affected by a couple blowups. If he walks 2 or 3 guys and gives up a home run, you might see an inning in the third with 5 runs given up. But I also think you're going to see a string of just pure dominance.
And most likely not any saves, maybe some holds, but not true fantasy value.
Unless he's doing, like the traditional 3 inning save, which, the rules for those are as long as you pitch 3 innings, doesn't matter how much your team wins by, as long as you finish the game. No, I can't imagine more than 1 or 2 accidental saves.
And then my team, unfortunately, plenty of prospects for the Marlins. The one I really like, and I feel like should get a chance sooner than later, because what else does Deyvison de los Santos have to prove in the minors after leading the minors with 40 home runs? But of course, he's already been sent down to AAA. It's not a hitter's haven there, but still, we've seen pretty prodigious power seasons from guys like Giancarlo Stanton and Marcelo Ozuna and etc. Do you feel like De Los Santos can replicate that at the major league level when he gets the call?
I love Deyvison de los Santos, and unfortunately, from a metrics perspective, he doesn't shine through. His chase rate is pretty bad. What he did at Reno last year seemed to be more of a mirage in the desert than what he was able to do at AAA once the trade happened and he went to the Marlins. And again, I'll relate back to this with if the organization believes in you, I'm more inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt. Well, we've now seen Deyvison de los Santos go from 3 different organizations. And as you said, he's already being sent back down. There is something within his game, even beyond the chase, that I don't think we can see from the prospect evaluation world that is really holding him back, because the upside is tremendous. The likelihood of him hitting that upside is lower than most, but you would think as an organization, you would rather have him playing than Matt Mervis. And the Marlins are telling us otherwise.
Yeah, and if I'm correct, he was a Rule 5 pick, wasn't he? And so
Mm-hmm.
and then he was given back. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's not a big vote of confidence. And then traded and then sent down, and yeah.
Well, to be fair, he was given back by the same organization that traded Junior Caminero for now the Brewers Meyer. So the Guardians have some of their own concerns, but in reality, it's the same concept as we just talked, right? Like the Guardians clearly didn't see enough in him or saw a massive weak point where they said, hey, he's never going to be able to overcome this. Why waste our time developing him? And then Diamondbacks trade him last year. So yeah, it's not a vote of confidence.
No, definitely not. All right, and then I think this counts. Let's just throw it in there. He's a prospect, right? Roki Sasaki. He's a prospect. He's a rookie. What are your expectations?
Well, the splitter this spring it's beautiful. I have concerns with any pitchers coming over from Japan in the first or second season because it's a change in environment, it's a change in culture. I don't think there's a better team for a concept fit or a culture fit for Roki than the Dodgers, right? You have Otani, you have the ability for Yamamoto to help out with that transition as well. They're going to presumably be giving the 6-man rotation. I really am interested to see if they line these guys up like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like they do in Japan and they do in college as well. But rookie season, I'm thinking really good ratios, thinking low innings. My expectation for volume is maybe 120 if we're lucky. But I'm staying away in redraft because I am deadly concerned of injury. And then watching him this spring and the way the body moves, it's a lot of torque on that elbow. Like what he's doing with that splitter is incredibly damaging for the body. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope this kid has an incredible career. I hope he returns incredible value in 2025, but his price is just too high for me right now.
Agree. And that's exactly where I'm at. Love the player. Don't love. I mean, the situation is good for him. I don't think it's ideal necessarily from again, just overall production fantasy standpoint of accumulating the numbers we want to see. But again, it's the red flag. It's always going to be there with any pitcher, but especially when you have a guy who's already had that present. I mean, it just comes back down to what we talked about before with any pitcher. You almost rather have the guy who's coming off the Tommy John than is waiting for it to happen. I mean, because at least you already know it's been there and it's done that. So hopefully it doesn't happen, obviously, but you never know.
Roki was, and this is when he was going through the J15 international signing period, news broke that he was recommended Tommy John in Japan a couple of years ago. It was confirmed by a couple major news outlets, but we don't have any like real documentation or real understanding of what that meant. And I had kind of said to you on the podcast Palooza with Garrett Cole that it was my fault for taking him in TGFBI because I just overlooked the fact that he had an elbow issue last year. And I was like, well, that's no big deal, right? We'll take him. The same concept for Roki, right? Okay, so you look at his stuff, same thing with Dustin May. Body shouldn't be able to do that. But now you put on the layer of, hey, there is an elbow injury, at least in his past, that wasn't necessarily addressed. Well, what if this is the season where he gets 3 starts out there and he's walking off the mound? And now where you took him, you're losing your SP possibly 2. Like that's a big loss knowing that you could have gone a different direction.
Exactly. And that's why, for example, mistake taking Kodai Senga last year where he was being taken very high. Maybe not so this year because it's mostly a negligible loss. Not like an afterthought, but still, you can survive it. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to break your heart if he goes down. And that's always what it's about, and so again, I think the overarching lesson here with prospects, no matter how high they're ranked, what they're projected to do, it's always about value. You can't get carried away. Just not get carried away. Have realistic expectations, which is hard to do, but also take some smart chances. All right, so we've come to the part where you shamelessly self-promote yourself. Matt, where can the people find you and your work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter, Matt_E_Morris. And then I write for Scout the Statline, as you had mentioned. And then Dynasty Dingers, which is our podcast. It's Dynasty Base. We're wherever you find podcasts. We are on YouTube underneath the Scout the Statline brand. You can find us there. And we go deep, right? My co-host is Doc, and him and I talk the 30 teamers that we're in. We talk about some of the hidden gems. And then throughout the season, we're really diving into, what are the players at the major league level doing based off what the prospect pedigree had shown us? Can we project increased value? Can we project potential opportunity to trade them now, buy them now? We're really looking at that projectability over the course of a 5 or 10-year lens. And it's what I love. And kind of as we talked about today, it also bleeds into redraft. So I really do appreciate you having me on today.
Of course, and that's what I love about it is, again, even for those of you, if you don't play a dynasty league, like I don't want to have to go that deep into the player pool. You don't have to, but I love it because it's just the whole point. This is, we talk. It's the end game. This is our brand is looking forward, not backward. Getting on top of that and knowing these guys now before everyone else does. Trying to draft that guy so you don't have to fight for him in the waiver wire. Knowing who might be that late season, breakout stud before that happens. And so I love trying to get to know as much as I can about what's real and what's not in terms of these prospects, because expectations just get blown way out of proportion a lot of times. So thank you for grounding me back into reality about some of these players.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to finish, I'm looking at the list that you put together, and I just wanted to throw at you kind of my quick ranking.
Yeah,
I have Dominguez 1, I have Shaw 2. I'm actually going to go crazy and go Cam Smith 3, and then wow, I didn't think I was going to do this, but Drake Baldwin 4, and then followed by Campbell and Anthony, um, because of everything we talked about today. And as a prospector, that breaks my heart because that is not how my rankings go. But
mm,
for redraft, everything we talked about goes into how I view those names.
perfect. That sounds good to me. That's pretty much where I would have him too. But now seeing what you put out there about Cam Smith makes me look a little bit harder at him because I wasn't fully, wanting to buy into spring numbers. And well, that's it for now. Thanks, Matt, for joining us. Of course, a lot more talk, not just for prospects. Everything you need for redraft is here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it and go check Matt out at Scout the Stat Line as well.